Hey everybody, it's EJ from Eyedesyn.com, and today we're going to try to recreate a cool HUD scene from the new Ghost in the Shell movie using Cinema 4D's Sketch Toon module. Let's learn how. So this is the scene that I'm going to try to create right here, this cool scanning scene right here, especially when it zooms in. And what I'm going to do is just break down how I created this kind of effect using Sketch Toon in Cinema 4D. So here's actually what I came up with. And you can see that we have some of the similar things going on. And I'm just going to break down, we're going to do a little deep dive into the world of Sketch Toon and show you how I recreated this cool HUD scan, digital scanny kind of effect from that Ghost in the Shell movie. And here's our guy we're going to be scanning. He's on his laptop. He looks like he's up to no good. I don't know what he's Googling or what he's doing over there, but we're going to scan him using those Sketch Toon little lines. So we're going to make this look like a very high-tech, like scanner HUD type of scene. And like I said, we're going to use Sketch Toon. So let's go ahead to our render settings and go to Effect. And we'll go all the way down to the bottom and grab Sketch Toon. Now, if you don't have the studio version or visualized version of Cinema 4D, you unfortunately do not have Sketch Toon. In that case, go buy the studio version and come back and watch this tutorial. But for those of you who have it, let's keep on going. And the main thing I want to do is just kind of show you, let me just turn these back on, what happens when you apply a Sketch Toon effect, render effect to your scene. Well, first, it adds a sketch material, and this basically controls the lines that are applied to your object. So if I go ahead and I just hit render here, and we'll just let it go. See, it's generating the lines down here. And what it's going to do is it's going to apply these 3 line types. So there's a whole bunch of different line types, and I cover Sketch Toon pretty in depth in a lot of other tutorials, which I will link up in the corner here, so be sure to check those out. But basically, by default, these are the 3 that it applies, and it's kind of cranking through the scene right now, and can be kind of slow depending on what your scene is. You're gonna see right away that everything just turns black, and that's because we have a black scene and we have a black color for our strokes. So if I just change this to white, and one thing I'm going to do as well is just turn off this enabled stroke thing. And what this will do is actually speed up our render, and hopefully you can see what actually happens here. And this is only good for certain things. I don't know if you guys can actually see it, but there's actually these like lines with little dots, and it's kind of because it kind of looks kind of weird. Typically you'd want to enable these strokes so it just gets rid of those little splotches along your line. But for, you know, cool VR effects or HUD elements and stuff like that, actually these nice little imperfections on the line are kind of cool. They look kind of digital, kind of like some digital distortion or something like that. So typically you want to leave that on and it smooths everything out, but I'll turn it off for this instance. And since we changed our color to white, I'll just hit render again. You're going to see that hopefully this actually speeds up the render quite a bit. You can see how much faster that rendered when we turned off those the enabled stroke option there. And you can also see that when this actually renders, you see all those splotches that are on our scene. And you're going to see that these line types, the folds, the creases, and the borders, again, I'm not going to cover all this stuff here, but that's basically the line types or the lines that are being outlined on my object here. So you can see a little bit of his slick cone back hair. You can see the total outline of his laptop and all that good stuff. But we're not going to actually worry about any of these line types except for the contour spline option here, or line option here. And what the contour option does, it's actually really cool. And I did a tutorial all about contour splines and using contour splines as an elevation map. And once you turn this on, it's going to give you all these options here for that line type. And again, we're using the default sketch material that it created when we applied the Sketch Toon effect to our scene. So it's actually all being controlled by this one material right here. And you can see with contour, it is applying lines, contoured lines that actually follow the contour of the objects in our scene. So you can see the wall over here. You can see the figure, our little character here. It's actually tracing the contour of this guy's pants and his head. It's tracing the contour of the laptop here, both laptops in the scene. And it is all being done by the object's X position. So it's being applied on the X-axis, kind of left to right. If we change this to, say, object Y, we're going to see lines going horizontal. And if I just render this really quick, you can see that it's being, and this is actually object Y, so it's all dependent on the object's axis. So sometimes you'll have lines going different directions. And one way to prevent that is to use world Y, which actually just disregards the Y-axis of the individual objects. You can see on the laptop here, my Y-axis is facing up, but on my character, my Y-axis is actually facing back. And these are all stock models and stuff. So sometimes, with stock models, they can be a little wonky. So when you have elements like this, instead of having to manually, move the axis and actually have that y-axis pointing upwards like the world y-axis, this is just going to use the world y-axis. And if I hit render here, you'll see that all the lines are the same. And again, we're doing some really cool contouring and getting some really cool effects. So you can see how we can use this combination of contour lines applied to our objects to create this really cool high-tech scanny HUD type of effect there. So what I'm going to do is I'll just use object X, and we have two different types of spacing. One is relative to individual objects, and one is absolute, which means that you can actually, instead of just saying how many lines you want applied to each object, across each object. So if you have a smaller object, you're going to have 20 lines fit into that tiny object. And you're going to see the lines closer together on a smaller object and wider on bigger objects like this room. But if we want them more spaced evenly, we'll want to do absolute, where we can actually say we want lines to be applied to all of our objects, say every 3 centimeters. And what that'll do, if I render this, so you can see what that does is it evenly applies those lines. Now the objects that are closer to the screen have more spread out lines, and our objects further back in Z space will be a little bit thinner just because they're further away from our camera. So this is actually the type that we want to do is this absolute spacing here. So we're just going to keep that like that. So now that we have our scene-wide effect being applied through our Sketch Toon effect here, what we can do is actually go into our sketch material here and do a little fine tuning here, because this is going to be the global effect that's applied to everything. And then we can actually individually create new sketch material textures to, create the different types of colors and stuff like that that were in the original render that I showed you. So you can see right here we have blue lines, we have orange lines. So those will all be created by individual separate materials, sketch materials that we can apply onto individual objects and control it that way, versus the global effect that's actually being applied by this one material through our default material that's being applied through everything. So whatever's in here is going to be applied all across our scene. The one thing I want to do though is I want to go into my shading tab of my Sketch Toon effect here and change the color of the background to black. And then for all of the objects in our scene also be black. So everything in our scene will just be black. Even if you already have a material already applied to it, it'll just change everything to black, which is exactly what we want, because we want black background and everything else, and then white lines. And what we can do, if I double click the sketch material here, we can start messing with these options here. And I'm just going to go right down the list of things that I want to change. So distort is actually really cool because you can actually check this on And we can choose, like, we can have linear distortion. So this will use some type of noise. So it's set to noise right now. You can see we have little ripples in our scene here, which is really cool. It looks pretty like nice and organic or glitchy. And what I'll do is actually make it a little bit smooth. So I'll do B-spline. I'll keep the noise the way it is. And these steps is basically the detail level. So we can actually lower this a little bit to get a little bit higher quality. The lower you go, the higher the quality of the subdivisions of those little lines and the curves. And this displacement, we can change the different noise. We can use sine wave. We can use a preset spline curve editor here. But I'll just use typical noise. And this displace is basically the strength of the displacement. And then the noise type you can choose here. And we can choose one type of noise that I thought worked really well was this nuttious. I'm not sure if that's pronounced correctly, but yeah. So here is, just like we had the type of mapping on the object space or world space, object using the object space, world space using the global world space. What I want to do is also do the same thing with our noise, is actually apply it in the world space, so it kind of works independent of all the different objects in our scene. So I'm going to set this to world, and then let's just see what this looks like here. You can see in our little material preview that we have some really cool distortion. You can see how this looks pretty nice. We're getting this really nice wavy effect going on, looking really cool. And we can actually adjust the scale if we want to, adjust the scale of that noise, so maybe make it a little bit smaller. And that's looking pretty cool. Some nice distortion going on right there. And we can also here add some animation to our noise. So we can use like an animation speed of 2 to have some nice undulation when we actually go ahead and render this. So this is looking all well and good. But the one thing I want to do is add some, like, instead of having straight solid lines, I want to have like little dots, like a dot matrix kind of thing. And we can do this very easily by going into our strokes tab that we came to disable the actual strokes here. And what we can do is turn on pattern. And what that'll do, if I go ahead and render this, it'll add dashed lines, and these lines are pretty thick, but you can see it adds like these cool little dashed lines. It almost looks like an impressionist painting almost, with little brush strokes or something like that. But we're actually going to choose, instead of dashed lines, we'll use dotted lines. So this will be much smaller dashes, or dots instead of dashes. So you'll see that we now have this kind of cool, like, dot matrixy kind of print out type of effect that's looking really, really cool. So let's go on to our color. I think we can just leave at white. Our thickness is something we're going to want to adjust though. The lines are way too thick. So I think what I'll do is make them very small and just adjust them as a thickness of like 0.2. And we can see how this looks. So that should make our dots much smaller. And you can see this is looking way more like a tech HUD type of scene, which is looking really, really cool. I'm really, really digging the really cool organic waviness here. It's almost like some kind of digital distortion happening over here. And you can see on our one wall here that we have no dots at all. So the reason why that's happening is, again, all the sketch lines that are being applied are driven through, as of right now, this global effect. So right now it's applying things in the object X position, but this wall is actually on the X axis here. So what that means is that it's actually being skipped and no dots or anything are being applied to it because our object's parallel with the dots. So hopefully that makes sense. So what we can do is we can actually go ahead and, instead of doing a global control or a global effect through our Sketch Toon, we can actually apply our sketch material to our actual object that we need to fix, and it's this room element here. So what I'm going to do is just drag and drop the sketch material onto my room object, and what that'll do is apply a sketch style tag. And this allows us to control the sketch lines and the sketch properties on an object level versus scene-wide level that it was being applied with our main effect here. So everything that is going through here is applying globally, but we can apply different types of effects locally by applying these sketch style tags. So what happens is by default, this is set to just replace all. So this means that this line type that we set in the sketch style tag is going to actually replace the sketch style material and all this stuff in the global effect for that object we just applied that sketch tag to. So if I render this out, I don't think much will change. Well, actually a lot will change because we no longer have that contour effect being applied to our wall. It's this folds, edges, and folds, creases, and border. So what we need to do is on this object level, go and enable contour. And again, we'll change this to absolute, and we'll change this step to match the step that we had in our global settings, which is 3. And what we actually want to do is we still want to maintain the global effect. So instead of replacing it, we're just going to add this line type onto the line type we have set in our render settings. So we're combining the local option of whatever sketch tag we change here. So we can maybe have this as a object Y instead of object X. So then we'll have the object Y contour lines combined with the object X contour lines. So you can see how we can get like more grid type effects here. So let's see, since it's on object Y, you can see now we added those Y lines. Let me actually just go into interactive render region here so I don't keep clicking off of my render here. Hopefully that makes sense. What I did is I'm adding these Y lines to the actual global effect that's being applied, which is the object X. So that is all controlled with this mix tab. So we can actually just say replace all, and that's the default, and that'll actually replace everything on that wall, and that'll actually blow out the object X contour splines. But if I say add, it'll just add on to it, and you can see that we're mixing those two line types. So we're getting object level control of our line types by using sketch style tags here, and then using the mix mode to mix sketch styles together. So that's looking good, and we're going to actually use more sketch style tags to be able to apply different line types to different objects in our scene. So what we'll do now is I want to keep going and working on this sketch material we have here, and this will just be our white dot material. So we changed the thickness to a very small thickness. What we're going to do now is move on to opacity. And what we're going to do is add some noise to our opacity here. And as this updates, you can see that it added some noise. And right now it's mapping on a 2D line mapping. And again, we're going to use world mapping. So it's actually using world coordinates so we can get much more predictable looking effects here. And you can see we have a little bit of some noise adjusting the opacity here. You can see a little bit of variation, and again we have a very small noise. So what I'll do is I'll scale this up to like 2000, and again I think I want to use some notches because I think it just has a really cool look to it. So we scaled up the noise really high, and you can see, look how cool that looks. We have these really nice threads and stuff like that. It almost looks like digital threads added to our scene here, and especially the floor is looking really cool, and the desk here. I think what I want to do is maybe tone back a little bit this opacity. So we'll just move the opacity, and then I'll go ahead and adjust the actual strength of that noise just to get back some of, because right now it's just blowing out some of the lines there. So I'll just add a little bit because I just want a little bit of contrast, a little bit of variation, some organic variation. And I think that's looking pretty good. Let's maybe bring up our opacity a little bit because we're losing some of our dots in the back here. And I think that's looking pretty good. And again, we can actually animate the speed of this noise on this as well. So I'll change this to 2, and this will then animate and undulate and add some really nice organic movement to our noise. All right, so I think that's all I want to take care of with the actual background dots that we have going on here. Now I want to focus on applying some cool contour lines to make our little character, our little guy here, stand out. So what I'll do is, let me just duplicate this white dot material, and I'll rename this orange dot, and I can just apply this again, just like we applied that sketch style tag to our room to apply different effects and sketch styles to an object of this wall here. We can do the same thing and apply a different sketch style to the man here. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to want to replace these lines on that altogether. So we'll just leave that as replace. And I'm just going to turn off the folds, creases, and border here, and again turn on contour. So we have our new sketch material here applied to our man object here, our little man character. And what we can start doing is adjusting some of the features of this line material, or this sketch material here. So the first thing I want to do is go to the color here, and I want to actually have some cool yellows and oranges being applied to this. So what I'll do is I'll change this color from that white to like some orange, and we'll have this update here, and you'll see that it's very faint right now. Let me actually go and just skip ahead to my the thickness here and just up the thickness of that new orange dot material here so we can see this a little bit better. There we go, you can definitely see that. So what I want to do is adjust the color so there's a little bit more of a gradation, and we can control the color with a lot of these modifiers here, and I'll use a combination of a couple. One is going to be along the stroke, and we can actually set blending modes, like you can set blending modes in Photoshop to be able to apply different colors and add it on top of the color that we selected here. So what I'll do is in this gradient, I'll change it from black and white to like yellow, like some light yellow and some orange. And then what I'll do is also utilize the screen angle, which is basically going to apply gradation depending on how that object is, or how that line is facing the angle of our screen here. So what I'll do with this one is actually apply a multiply blending mode on top of, so we have add, that's adding on top of this screen angle, and then that's being multiplied on our orange. So what I'll do here is just have a little gradation from, instead of black to white to black, we'll have like orange to white to like yellow, something like that. What we should see is a little bit of variation as far as like a gradient being applied to here. It adds just a little bit more interest to this object or this line type. So we have some yellow here, we have some oranges here as well. So it's looking a lot better as far as just instead of just using a flat color. So utilizing a couple modifiers, using blending modes helps a lot. So the one thing I want to do is let's go to our sketch style tag that's on our man object here. And what I want to do is actually change the position of the contour lines, because right now it's actually facing the wrong direction. Because what I actually want this to look like is that it's actually being scanned through our point of view, or scanned through our camera. So what I want to do is, instead of Object X or anything, I want to use World Z. And what this will do is actually apply contour lines in Z space. And you can see this adds really cool contour lines here. And again, I want to use the absolute spacing. So I can actually say I want lines, contour lines applied, say every 2 centimeters here. So we'll have quite a bit of contour lines going on. And you'll see that this really helps to distinguish our character from the rest of our scene here. So let's go ahead, and these lines are looking fairly boring at the moment, so we can go back into our sketch material editor here and just move on down the line. So just like we applied different types of modifiers to like our distortion and our color, we can do the same thing with our thickness so it's not so uniform. So we can use noise as a modifier here. If I just let the interactive render region work here, you can see that it thinned out our lines a little bit, so that's looking kind of cool. So let's just adjust what type of noise we have here. So again, I want to use a world mapping and not line mapping. So this will actually apply a global type of noise that we can then control more predictably. And again, I want to use the nutshous type of noise. I just really like how that type of noise looks as far as when it's applied to these lines. You get this really nice contrast going on here. And I'll just up the octaves as well, just so there's a lot more detail to that noise type that we have there. And let's just scale up the noise a little bit as well. And that's looking pretty good. And again, let's add just a little bit of animation to our noise on our thickness there. So I want this to maybe animate a little bit faster than everything else. And maybe add a little contrast to that noise as well. Let's see what that looks like. So that looks cool. And let's go on next to our opacity. And this has the opacity that we applied to the original white sketch material there. So the one thing I want to do is just crank up the strength of our opacity. So I want full opacity. And this should bring back a lot of our color here. What I want to do is actually bring down the noise, because right now the noise is too large. We're actually missing a lot of our lines here. You can see that brings it back just a little bit. We can add a little bit of contrast. And again, we'll just keep that animation speed intact to animate some of our noise here. And let's just try a regular noise because it's actually cutting out a little bit too much. Let's see what this looks like. There, that brought back a lot more of our detail and still added a little bit of opacity differences between some of these lines here. So that's looking a little bit better, digging that a lot more. And I think that's basically it for this orange dot texture here. So next thing I want to do is add another layer of dots that's going to be more horizontal. So what I'll do is let's go ahead and duplicate the orange dot type, orange dot material, and let's change this to blue dot. And let's apply this. Let's go ahead and actually change this color to blue. So I'll get rid of the modifiers and we'll just make this like a dark blue here. And again, I want to apply a different line type to this man object. So just like you would want to apply two different types of materials to an object, we can also apply two different types of sketch style tags or sketch styles to one single object. So again, by default, it's going to have a sketch style tag with the false creases and border turned on, and we'll just turn those off. And the one thing we want to do is still utilize contour, but what we want to do is you can see that we have another set of contour lines applied, but they're in the wrong direction. I want them to be in the Y and not the X. So what I'll do is just change this to worldwide and change this to absolute again so I can adjust the spacing here. I want quite a small step, so let's try like 1.2, just a little bit over 1, and see what this looks like. So you can see we have this really cool orange contour lines, and then we mixed it with the blue contour lines that's looking really cool. So that's looking good. We can now go into our blue dot sketch material, and the one thing I want to do, the color's fine, I just want to adjust the thickness. I want to add a little bit of contrast between this blue line, the blue contour line, and the orange contour lines that we have going the other direction. So what I'll do is I'll get rid of the noise and I'll just shrink the thickness to about 0.8, just a little bit less than a thickness of 1. And let's just see if this adds enough, some nice contrast. And I think that helps out a lot. So I think that's looking super, super cool. Again, I think there's a little bit too much of the blue showing up. So what we can do is go to our opacity and adjust some of the opacity settings here. So maybe we can just bring down the overall opacity of our blue lines there. We can adjust the noise. Again, we can maybe use the nutshous noise that I've been liking for this little type of effect. And again, I want to crank up the detail of the octave so we got more detail in that noise. So there's a little bit more noise detail there. You can see that kind of toned back our blue lines back quite a bit. So you can see we're actually losing a little bit. So let's bring down the scale of our noise. So let's just try like let's try 180 and see what that looks like. And we should, by shrinking the size of that noise, get more of those lines back. So we're getting a little bit more. Let's maybe crank up the opacity just so we can see that blue detail a little bit. Maybe a little bit more. And I think that's looking really, really good. So we got the blue lines that are on the Y contour. We have the Z contour lines, these orange contour lines. And combined with these other lines in the background, this is looking really, really good. This is looking really nice, like a nice computer scanning kind of device. We can see what this guy's up to, this shady looking dude on his laptop. The one thing I think I want to do is let's adjust the distortion on those this blue line. So maybe we can add a little bit more displacement here. Let's maybe try a displacement of like 6. We can up the displacement there and let's see what that looks like. That's looking pretty good. I'm digging how much distortion there is. Some more digital distortion there. We can maybe try a different type of noise, so maybe more blistered turbulence, so it's a little bit more sharp a noise. Can also add some contrast if we'd like to too. So let's just see what this ends up looking like here with the sharper bit of noise. That's looking pretty good. Maybe adjust the contrast of that noise as well. Cool, I'm digging that. I'm liking how there's a little bit of the blue kind of popping out and poking out from the actual object itself. So that's looking pretty cool. I'm really digging that. Let's go ahead and let's add some of these orange lines to our background, because right now the background is looking fairly bland. So let's go ahead and I'm going to duplicate this orange dot material, and I'll just name this scene orange dot there. And then what I'll do is I'll just select all the objects in my scene that I want to apply that to, because again, we already have the global white dot being applied there, so we can't actually apply another sketch material type globally in here, unfortunately. We can just do one at a time. So if we want to apply sketch materials to everything else, we actually have to go in and select all the objects we want to add these this new line type to, or these new contour lines to. So I think what I'll do is I'll just not have the smaller items here, but like the laptop, the TV, the room, and the desk. I think that's good. I'll leave the laptop alone. That's actually in his lap. And maybe this floor bar there. And with all those selected, I can just right click on this sketch material and just say apply. And then with all of those tags now applied and I have them all selected, I can say, instead of replace all, again, I want to add these lines on top of it. And you'll see that adding that new sketch material blew out the other line type here. So I want to say add, so we can add on top of that global white dot material. And you'll see that our lines will then pop back up. There you go. We have our lines back again. And then we'll go to our lines tab here. Again, uncheck the folds, creases, and border. Check on the contour. And then for this, I actually want to do just world X. And again, do absolute. And you can see that this step of 100 centimeters is way too much, because we have those lines spread out a little bit too much. So let's bring this down to say 40 and see what that looks like. And that's looking fairly cool. I think the one thing that is missing here is that we have a lot of lines here, not so many lines on this little TV element. So let's maybe try Object X and see if that helps out a little bit, because then it'll actually take into account the object space, and it's looking okay. So again, we can actually control this on a per object basis. So we can see that with this effect, or with this sketch style tag, contour type applied to everything, the actual room is looking good, but our desk and our laptop aren't looking very good. So what we can do is actually go to our desk and change this to, let's just say, World X. You can see that added the nice lines, the direction that it actually matches the floor here, and we can do something similar to the laptop desk. So again, we can do world X, and maybe we might even want to change the step and bring that down a little bit. Let's just see what this looks like though. Yeah, so you can see that only one line kind of shows up. So let's just bring this to like 10. You can see we have some more lines right here. That's looking pretty good. So I'm liking that a little bit better. Let's move on to this TV element here. And let's go to World X. And let's see what happens here. So again, that step is way too much. Cool. So I'm liking that better. We have more of the lines showing up there. But again, we're missing the orange lines on this wall. So what we could do is go to the room. We can apply this. Let's just grab the TV sketch tag material, and I'll just command click and drag and apply that to the room. And again, I'll make sure this actually has the add blending mode, so it's actually going to add on top of all the other sketch style tags here. Let's just choose world Y. You can see that's actually facing the right direction, but that's actually being applied to the back wall here too, and the floor. So the first thing I want to do is just increase the steps, the step centimeters here. And that's looking a lot better. It's matching the width of the distance of the lines on the floor. But what I want to do is actually not have the lines be applied to the back here. I don't want this grid, but just in case you wanted to create a grid, all you have to do is just combine some world X and world Y, and that'll create a nice little grid there for you. But what I want to do is utilize the selection tabs here. And what I can do is on this room, just select the wall that I want. So right here, and I'll just select all these polygons here. And I think I got them all, and I'll just create a selection, just say set selection. And then what I can do is say include just the lines on this polygon selection. So let's go back into interactive render region here. And what we should see is, yep, all those lines of the sketch style tag are just limited to that selection that we just added. So there we go. We have the nice lines, the nice little orange highlights on this wall back here, the wall here, and maybe just increase the lines, steps here even just a little bit more. And that's looking really, really good. So one thing I want to cover as well is this variation here. So what we can do if we go to the main global white dot that's being applied to pretty much all the objects in our scene, except for the objects, actually it's just the guy, that we actually created the other sketch style tags that overwrote this white dot material. We actually use the variation to add a little bit more organic variation to the spacing of these lines. So if you don't want it to look so evenly spaced, we can add just a little bit of variation here. So maybe a variation of 1. And you can see that it's not so uniform, and it looks a lot more digital and a lot more organic. Organic, digital, I'm not sure if those two work, but hey, let's just make it a little bit more randomly computer generated. That's it. Maybe not organic. But there we go. So using a combination of the sketch style tags, all using the contour splines, using the different kind of positions, world Y and absolute spacing, and all that stuff, we created a really cool scanning HUD composition using Sketch Toon. So what we can now do is hop on over to After Effects and add some glows and do a little bit of compositing here to make this a little bit more imperfect, because again, a render out of Cinema 4D is never completely done until you do just a little bit of tweaking or compositing to it. Every Cinema 4D composition or render deserves a little bit of compositing love. So let's go ahead and let's just add a couple of glows here. So I'll go to Stylize, Glow, and then adjust the threshold here so we get some of this nice highlight here of the yellows. Just zoom in here a little bit, and maybe we'll just blur this out a little bit. And we can just duplicate this glow and just blur this out a little bit. And maybe have this kind of extend all across the screen here, and maybe just dampen that intensity just slightly so we have a little bit of this overwhelming glow all across our object. We can go ahead and duplicate this whole setup. I'll just delete the glows here, and I can just go ahead and maybe blur out everything underneath here with a Gaussian blur. Something like that. And I'll just do a screen mode on top of that as well. Maybe add another glow on top of this. Maybe adjust the screen mode here. So it looks a little bit more roughed up, a little bit more imperfect, not so sharp. And now we can do curves adjustment. We'll just grab an adjustment layer here. Go and grab a curves. Just do like a little S-curve action here. Maybe increase the blue values there just a little bit. And then what we can do is maybe we can do like a nice little tint as well. So maybe map this to some bright blue, and then we'll just bring the tint amount down just a little bit. Adds just a little bit of unification of all of the colors in the scene, adds a nice little tint. Something like that. And so this will be our color correction adjustment layer. And what I'll do is just add a nice vignette adjustment layer here. Go to color correction, curves, and I'll just darken this overall. And I want to blur this out as well. So we'll do a Gaussian, if I can spell. There we go. Gaussian blur on top of that. Just blur this out. Repeat edge pixels, and then what I will do is I'll just create a circular mask, hit F to feather that out, and then just change this from add to subtract so we have this nice vignette, this nice blurring along our edges here. And that, I think, helps a lot. So it looks like we're looking through a scanning device or something like that, or a monitor, and just RAM preview this. And here we are, we got our cool text scan effect using Sketch Toon and a little bit of compositing inside of After Effects. All right, so there is my Ghost in the Shell HUD scan line impression, the best that I can do using Cinema 4D and Sketch Toon. I'm really excited to be back using Sketch Toon, and hopefully you guys enjoy this one. But if you have any questions about anything I covered, some Sketch Toon, anything like that, let me know in the comment sections. And remember, I'm going to be sure to post a lot of my other Sketch Toon tutorials on here so you can really learn more. Because we went a little bit more in the advanced settings. So if you got lost, be sure to check out some of the basics. It will really help you out a lot. I love Sketch Toon. So if you make anything using this tutorial, I would love to see it. Be sure to share it with me on Twitter, on Instagram, on the Facebooks, all that good stuff. I'd love to see what you guys are making. And if you like this tutorial, be sure to hit the like button. I'd really appreciate that. And as always, really appreciate all of you out there watching this tutorial. I'll see you in the next one. Bye, everybody.